Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome back to Night Stories from VHS Era. Before we begin, let me ask you something. Do you remember what it felt like to tiptoe through a quiet house on a Saturday morning? Do you remember that strange thrill of waking up before everyone else, heart pounding with a single purpose, to be the first to grab the remote? Do you remember the hum of the CRT screen coming to life? The glow bathing the room before the sun even thought about rising? And do you ever wonder why that simple act felt like a tiny, silent victory? Stay with me until the end of this video, and I promise we'll walk through those soft-lit mornings together again. By the end, you'll remember not only how it felt, but why those early moments meant everything. It always started with that impossible stillness. Even in sleep, my body seemed to know when it was Saturday. The sun wasn't up yet, but there it was, that whisper inside me, tugging me gently from dreams. I'd open my eyes and stare at the ceiling in the soft blue half-dark of dawn, listening. No creaks from the hallway, no running water, no clinking dishes in the kitchen. That meant it was safe. That meant I was the first. Sliding out of bed without a single squeak, I'd slip my feet into my worn Sonic the Hedgehog slippers and begin the ritual. Was I nervous someone else would beat me to the living room? Absolutely. That was the whole point. The house was a maze of shadows at that hour. I knew every floorboard by heart. You had to skip the one outside Mom and Dad's room, or it would cry out and ruin everything. I learned to breathe lighter. Even my pajamas felt quieter, like they understood the mission. That long hallway, it felt like walking through a dream. You could see the living room at the end, just past the stairs, and the glow from the streetlight outside the big window. The way it shone through the sheer curtains made everything look faintly golden, like the house itself remembered something warm. Sometimes I'd wonder, did the TV know I was coming? Did it feel the same sense of excitement as I crept closer with every soft step? I remember the weight of the remote, that gray plastic rectangle with the slightly wobbly battery cover, the faded channel buttons, the mysterious input one I never dared touch. That remote was a throne, a key, a crown, and claiming it first meant the world. I'd press the red button, and then it would happen. The soft, static thump of the screen powering on, the whir of something spinning inside, the Philips logo glowing quietly, and that was it. The world was mine. Do you remember the sound of cartoons before anyone said a word in the house? The early morning intro songs like tiny anthems just for you? That hum of music and color before the day even truly began. I'd curl up on the floor, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of fabric softener and old Saturday mornings. I always brought a pillow too, one from my bed, not the couch. Something about that made it feel like I had brought part of my little world into the bigger one. Just me, the TV, and whatever came on first. Sometimes it was Garfield and Friends. Other times it was Recess or The Weekenders or X-Men, the animated series, depending on how early I got there. I knew the schedule better than I knew my own multiplication tables. And if you missed the first show, it never felt quite right. Like missing the opening note of your favorite song. Why did it feel so important to be first? Why did those quiet, early moments matter more than anything else? Because that was my time. Not shared with siblings, not negotiated with dad and his news or mom and her morning shows. It was sacred, silent, and entirely mine. And I wasn't just watching cartoons. I was breathing in a kind of magic that only lived between 6 and 8 a.m. There was something about those shows, how they made the world feel simpler, how they reminded you that the biggest problems could be solved in 22 minutes with friendship, bravery, or just eating the last slice of pizza before the villain got it. The commercials too, they were half the experience. Do you remember begging for Skip It or Crossfire or Creepy Crawlers after seeing them flash across the screen in glorious over-the-top voiceovers? Batteries not included, they always said. But in those moments, I didn't care. I believed everything they told me. And the cereal. The cereal. Even if I wasn't hungry yet, I'd go pour a bowl of Fruit Loops or Captain Crunch, careful not to let the milk hit the bowl too loudly. I'd carry it back like treasure, trying not to spill, cradling it as if any sound might wake the world and end my morning kingdom. Eating cereal while watching cartoons alone was something different. You weren't just a kid anymore. You were the kid, the director, the audience, the king of quiet. And eventually, I'd hear them, the creaks of someone waking, maybe the shuffle of my brother's socks down the hallway, maybe mom turning on the kettle. And that moment, right there, that's when I knew the spell was fading. But I didn't mind, because I had it. I had the quiet, the glow, the blanket. I had the remote. I had my show. And now that I think back, I think I missed that the most. Not the cartoons, not even the cereal. I miss that feeling of waking up with a purpose, of being completely alone but never lonely, of holding the beginning of the day in the palm of my hand. I miss being that kid and that moment in that house. So, if you ever find yourself awake early, long before the rest of the world, try turning on something old and simple. Wrap yourself in a blanket that smells like yesterday. Eat cereal, and remember what it felt like to be first. The kitchen was quiet, almost reverent, as if the early morning understood the sacred nature of what was about to happen. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floor beneath my socks. There was something about the feel of that cold linoleum tile that made the experience even more real, more grounded. I padded softly across the kitchen, my mind already buzzing with excitement because I knew what came next. The cereal, the real co-star of every Saturday morning. Did anyone else treat picking a cereal like choosing a movie at the video store? I used to stand in front of the pantry like I was making a life decision, debating between the fruity loops of neon pink and green or the chocolatey puffed balls that left the milk looking like liquid dessert. But that day, I went straight for the Cinnamon Toast Crunch. The box was already half empty, its corners a little worn, the top flaps bent in from rust mornings past. I loved how the little cartoon chefs looked like they were always up to something sneaky. That was the magic of the 90's. Even the cereal boxes were part of the story. I poured slowly, carefully, the clinks of the crunchy squares falling into my favorite bowl, the one with the faded Looney Tunes characters dancing around the rim. Bugs Bunny's ears were chipped from years of washing, but he was still there, smiling like he knew what time it was. Then the milk, always whole milk back then. It hit the cereal with a soft splash, a cold wave over golden sugar, sending up a tiny puff of cinnamon-scented steam. I always took the first spoonful before the cereal had a chance to get soggy. That first bite was sacred. Do you remember how it felt? That very first spoonful, right as the theme song came on? It was always perfectly timed. I'd rush back to the living room, cradling my bowl like it was made of glass, and ease myself into the deep cushions of the couch just as the screen glowed with familiar color and sound. There was something incredible about how those opening jingles made everything feel like it was going to be okay, like the world was gentle and simple just for that hour. No responsibilities, no homework, no yelling from older siblings, just me, the cereal, and the sound of Captain Planet, he's our hero, or gummy bears bouncing here and there and everywhere. Sometimes I would switch channels just to catch the intros again. They were like warm-up acts before the real show. Do you remember the colors? How vivid everything looked. The reds weren't just red, they were fire truck red. The blues were sky blue and bubblegum blue and denim blue, all in the same frame. Cartoons in the 90s didn't just entertain, they glowed. And the cereal? It tasted brighter when it was eaten during those first moments, during that beloved theme song. I always sat cross-legged, spoon in hand, eyes wide. And every once in a while, I'd glance down at the swirling milk in my bowl, now lightly tinted with cinnamon or chocolate, and think to myself, this is the best part of the week, because it was. Nothing else came close, not even birthdays. Saturday morning cartoons with a bowl of sugary cereal was happiness in its purest form. There was this one Saturday I still think about more than the others. I had just opened a new box of Trix, back when the cereal still looked like actual fruit shapes and not those weird round puffs they turned into later. The rabbit on the box looked crazed with joy, arms in the air, surrounded by a rainbow of colorful fruit. That morning, the sun coming through the blinds caught the cereal just right. It lit up the bowl like it was filled with tiny jewels. I swear, I sat there for a moment just admiring it before I even picked up my spoon. As soon as I did, the theme song to X-Men the Animated Series burst from the TV speakers. That heavy synth and guitar riff, that perfect animation sequence. My spoon paused midair because I didn't want to blink and miss the moment when Wolverine popped his claws or Cyclops lit up the sky with his optic blast. I chewed slowly, as if rushing the cereal would ruin the music or the memory. Everything was in sync. The flavor, the sound, the smell of the milk and cereal mixing, the cool air of the living room, and the way my heart beat a little faster when my favorite show was finally on. That was the thing about being a kid in the 90s. We didn't just watch cartoons, we experienced them with all five senses. From the rustle of the cereal bag to the taste of sugar and cold milk, from the sound of the theme song to the feeling of the couch's textured fabric under our legs. Even the static charge from sitting too close to the old tube TV, it all played a part. Did your family ever buy those big variety packs of mini cereal boxes? The ones with perforated backs so you could pour milk right into the cardboard? We only got them for road trips, but once in a while, my mom would sneak them in as a treat. I remember one morning when I had a box of Fruit Loops standing straight up in front of me like it was my own personal breakfast theater. I poked the silver lining with a spoon, poured in the milk, and just sat there like a king watching his cartoons with no interruptions. The milk always leaked a little, but I didn't care. That was the price of magic. And then there were the commercials. Remember how even the ads felt like part of the cartoon universe? Everything was louder, funnier, more colorful. Nerf guns, gushers, skip-its, crossfire. You'd hum the jingle even after the commercial ended. I'd sometimes pause my chewing just to hear every word, wondering what it would be like to win a trip to Nickelodeon Studios or have my own Pizza Hut book-it party. Every bite of cereal during those breaks was another chance to dream. Those mornings taught me that the best memories aren't always the big events. Sometimes they're just a bowl of cereal, a cozy couch, and a cartoon that made you believe anything was possible. No cell phones, no social media, just the soft glow of a television set, the chill of milk on your tongue, and the rhythm of a theme song that made you feel seen. By the time the episode was halfway through, the cereal was gone, and I'd sipped the flavored milk like it was a treasure. And it was. That last drink tasted like the whole morning wrapped up in one gulp. Sweet, comforting, and gone too fast. Just like childhood. Stay with me for the next chapter, where I'll tell you what it felt like when the second wave of cartoons started. The ones that came right after the early morning classics. The transition was always subtle, but you could feel it. A shift in mood, a deeper color in the animation, and sometimes a new bowl of cereal. Because let's be honest, who only ever had one bowl? Once that first cartoon had settled its final scene and the theme song slowly faded out behind the network logo, the real test began. It wasn't just about watching cartoons anymore. It was about how you watched them. This was a skill, a ritual, a delicate dance perfected over years of instinct and near-miss disasters. Channel surfing during commercial breaks was not chaos, it was choreography. There was a sacred art to it. Not everyone could master the lineup. Only the devoted few who took their Saturday morning seriously knew how to move between channels with the precision of a symphony conductor. Your thumb had to hover over the remote like a sprinter waiting for the gunshot. You had to know exactly when to flip from Fox Kids to WB, from Nickelodeon to Cartoon Network, from ABC to the quieter, weirder world of PBS. Every network had its own flavor, its own tempo, its own moment to shine. There was no guide back then, no on-screen menu, no streaming platform to save your place. You had to remember. You had to memorize the timing of every show, the rhythms of every block. Pokémon started at 8 sharp on Channel 5, but Digimon followed at 8:30 on Channel 11. If you jumped too late, you'd miss the opening battle sequence. If you jumped too early, you'd catch a commercial and lose your place. Timing was everything. Missing the first 30 seconds of a show felt like skipping the opening act of a concert. It threw off the whole vibe. The commercials were your window. You had maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes tops, to leap from one story to the next without falling into that dreaded void. Static, a rerun, or worse, a live action show meant for adults. Nothing snapped you out of your cartoon high like an unexpected daytime soap or an infomercial about miracle knives. So you had to stay sharp, watch for patterns, count the seconds. The best surfers, the elite among us, could predict exactly how long a commercial break would last and jump back just in time for the theme song to end. I remember sitting there, remote in hand, legs tucked beneath me, eyes darting between the TV and the small watch on my wrist. I wasn't just a kid, I was a tactician, a strategist. My brothers used to mess with me, changing the channel while I was in the kitchen or turning down the volume so I couldn't hear the cues. But I never faltered. I knew every show's start and end like a liturgy. And when I say sacred lineup, I mean it. These weren't just cartoons. They were chapters in my weekly gospel. At 7:30, it was Recess on ABC. I'd catch the intro, those trumpets, the whistle, the chaos of kids bursting out of school, and by the second scene, I was already flipping to the Powerpuff Girls on Cartoon Network. I'd watch Blossom shout orders while Bubbles floated with wide eyes, and then when the first villain monologue hit, I'd jump to Yu-Gi-Oh! On WB. I didn't even like Yu-Gi-Oh! That much, but I had to keep up. It was part of the ritual. You couldn't miss an episode or you'd be lost the next week trying to piece together the plot like a crime scene. Sometimes I'd get bold. I'd try a 4-channel loop. Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, Fox Kids, and PBS. That was a dangerous game. You had to know exactly where you left off and trust your memory to guide you back. I once tried to squeeze in an extra 5-minute peek at Jackie Chan Adventures while waiting for a commercial break to end on Rugrats. I misjudged the timing. By the time I flipped back, Tommy and Chucky were already deep into a fantasy sequence, and I felt like I had missed half the episode. That mistake haunted me for days. I never played it that loose again. The commercials were your window. You had maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes tops, to leap from one story to the next without falling into that dreaded void. Static, a rerun, or worse, a live action show meant for adults. Nothing snapped you out of your cartoon high like an unexpected daytime soap or an infomercial about miracle knives. So you had to stay sharp, watch for patterns, count the seconds. The best surfers, the elite among us, could predict exactly how long a commercial break would last and jump back just in time for the theme song to end. I remember sitting there, remote in hand, legs tucked beneath me, eyes darting between the TV and the small watch on my wrist. I wasn't just a kid. I was a tactician, a strategist. My brothers used to mess with me, changing the channel while I was in the kitchen or turning down the volume so I couldn't hear the cues. But I never faltered. I knew every show's start and end like a liturgy. And when I say sacred lineup, I mean it. These weren't just cartoons. They were chapters in my weekly gospel. At 7:30, it was recess on ABC. I'd catch the intro, those trumpets, the whistle, the chaos of kids bursting out of school, and by the second scene, I was already flipping to the Powerpuff Girls on Cartoon Network. I'd watch Blossom shout orders while Bubbles floated with wide eyes, and then, when the first villain monologue hit, I'd jump to Yu-Gi-Oh! On WB. I didn't even like Yu-Gi-Oh! That much, but I had to keep up. It was part of the ritual. You couldn't miss an episode or you'd be lost the next week, trying to piece together the plot like a crime scene. Sometimes I'd get bold. I'd try a 4-channel loop: Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, Fox Kids, and PBS. That was a dangerous game. You had to know exactly where you left off and trust your memory to guide you back. I once tried to squeeze in an extra 5-minute peek at Jackie Chan Adventures while waiting for a commercial break to end on Rugrats. I misjudged the timing. By the time I flipped back, Tommy and Chucky were already deep into a fantasy sequence, and I felt like I had missed half the episode. That mistake haunted me for days. I never played it that loose again. There was something exhilarating about the constant flipping. You didn't just consume stories, you chased them. You hunted for the exact moment of return, the perfect second to dive back in. And when you nailed it, when you caught the precise instant your favorite show picked up again, it felt like a victory, like you had bent time to your will. The cereal bowl, now empty, sat forgotten on the floor as you rode the wave from one cartoon world to another without missing a beat. My parents would walk by and shake their heads, wondering how I could follow anything with all that flipping. But they didn't get it. They didn't understand that each show had a place, a purpose, a mood. If I needed a laugh, I went to Animaniacs. If I wanted to feel a spark of awe, I jumped to Batman the Animated Series. For energy, it was Dexter's Laboratory. For comfort, Arthur or Franklin on PBS. It wasn't random, it was emotional navigation. Sometimes, on rare weekends when the sky was gray and the wind rattled the windows, I wouldn't even move during commercials. I'd just sit there, letting the ads wash over me. The jingles for sugary snacks, the over-the-top voices selling action figures, the dramatic previews for next week's episodes. I'd mouth along to them like a song I had memorized. Even commercials had their place in the sacred lineup. They weren't interruptions, they were bridges. They gave you time to breathe, to shift gears, to switch worlds. There were unwritten rules too. Never serve to news channels. Never trust infomercials with people shouting. And under no circumstance should you ever land on a talk show. It killed the magic instantly. It reminded you that the adult world still existed, waiting just outside the warm glow of your living room sanctuary. That remote control felt like a wand in my hand. I wielded it with purpose. My fingers knew the button layout by heart. Up 2 clicks for Nickelodeon, down 3 for Cartoon Network. A tap of the recall button to jump back to the last cartoon in progress. It wasn't about luck, it was about rhythm, intuition, trust. The kind of skills only built from countless Saturdays spent in the trenches of early morning television. And sometimes I'd stop surfing, not because I was tired, but because I found the episode. You know the kind, the one you hadn't seen in months, the one where your favorite character got their moment, or the Halloween special, or the rare crossover. When that happened, everything else faded. The need to flip, the need to scan, even the cereal, it all disappeared. The room stilled, and for 22 minutes, I was locked in. When the final credits rolled and the familiar instrumental swelled one last time, I'd sit back, remote resting quietly beside me, and exhale. That was it, the perfect lineup. Not just watched, but mastered. Not just remembered, but felt. And even now, years later, when I hold a modern remote in my hand, so sleek and quiet, I sometimes miss the old one. The chunky plastic, the way the buttons clicked, the ritual, the chase, the sacred lineup. The belief that with enough timing and precision, you could watch everything, never miss a moment, and make every Saturday morning feel infinite. Next, I'll take you to another special moment, when the sun started creeping through the blinds and your cartoon sanctuary slowly dissolved into regular daytime programming. That strange, quiet shift, the feeling that the magic was ending and it was time to go outside, or at least pretend you might. There was something transcendent about those Saturday morning cartoon blocks. Not just individual shows, but the full arc of programming. Each episode flowing into the next like chapters of a book you couldn't put down. They didn't just feel long, they felt limitless. Once the lineup began, time loosened its grip. It was as if the real world paused for a few hours, making room for magic to unfold across the screen. Every network had its own flavor of these sacred cartoon blocks. Fox Kids brought action and grit. WB favored heart and humor. Nickelodeon leaned into the absurd, while Cartoon Network danced in the surreal. And PBS, gentle as a whisper, carried its own quiet wonder. But what united them all was the promise of adventure, the guarantee that for a few precious hours, your living room could be anything. A futuristic city, a monster-infested forest, an underground lab, or the edge of the galaxy. Those blocks started with a familiar rhythm, a catchy jingle, a station logo spinning into place, and then it began. That first burst of color and sound. And before you could even settle into the couch, you were off, running beside heroes, laughing with creatures, gasping at plot twists. It didn't matter that it was animated. These stories felt real, maybe even more real than the world outside. I remember those blocks vividly, each one seared into my memory like pages from a childhood diary. One morning might start with Spider-Man, the animated series, where the skyline of New York turned into a battleground of webs, gadgets, and betrayal. Peter Parker's double life felt impossibly cool. He was just a guy trying to do his homework and protect the city from mutants and madmen. It felt strangely relatable, even though I had never been bitten by a radioactive anything. Right after that, without a single breath, would come X-Men. That theme song still hums somewhere deep in my brain. It was different from other shows, grittier, smarter. The characters wrestled with injustice and identity in ways I couldn't fully grasp back then, but I felt it. I could see the pain in Rogue's eyes when she longed to touch someone. I could feel the weight on Cyclops' shoulders as he tried to lead a team fracturing at the seams. That cartoon taught me about sacrifice before I even knew the word. Then the mood would shift. Suddenly, you were thrown into the chaos of Tiny Toon Adventures or Pinky and the Brain. The world snapped into absurdity, and laughter became the new soundtrack. A moment ago, I was watching Magneto rip apart steel with his mind. Now, I was cheering for a mouse trying to take over the world using kitchen appliances and the help of a very confused sidekick. And somehow, it all made sense. The transitions never felt jarring. They felt like acts in a play, all part of the same daydream. The beauty of cartoon blocks was the rhythm. Each show held your hand and passed you to the next. They didn't compete, they complemented. The serious would hand off to the silly, the adventurous to the heartfelt, the weird to the warm. And as a kid, you didn't even notice how carefully it was all curated. You just sank deeper into the couch, letting the characters become your weekend companions. Some of the best adventures didn't come from the big names. They hid in the odd corners of programming, in half-hour slots that felt forgotten by the mainstream. Gargoyles with its moody aesthetic and Shakespearean undertones. The Tick with its offbeat satire and absurd catchphrases. Or Freakazoid, which felt like a fever dream, somehow both nonsense and brilliance at once. These were the hidden gems, the kind of shows that made you feel like you were in on a secret the rest of the world hadn't caught on to yet. The characters from these blocks weren't just entertainment, they were anchors. They felt like friends. I didn't just watch Doug, I was Doug. Awkward, creative, full of questions. I didn't just enjoy Hey Arnold, I lived in that neighborhood. I knew the sounds of the street, the tone of Principal Warts' voice, the way Helga's fist curled every time she saw Arnold walk by. Each world had its own language, its own rules, and I was fluent in all of them. What made these cartoon blocks feel like endless adventures wasn't just the content, it was the feeling they created, that you were traveling, growing, and learning with these characters. They went to new places, faced new challenges, and by the end of each episode, you had changed a little too. Maybe you picked up a new joke, a catchphrase, or a bit of courage. Maybe you just felt less alone. There were moments when the screen would go black for a second between shows, and you'd catch your reflection. Hair messy, cereal crusting on the edge of your bowl, the morning sun creeping across the carpet, and it hit you. You hadn't moved in hours, but your mind had. It had run across rooftops, swum through oceans, soared through space. And the best part? The journey wasn't over. The next show was already starting. Some mornings, my siblings and I would narrate the transitions ourselves, pretending we were broadcasters. We'd announce the next show with fake enthusiasm, trying to imitate the overly excited voiceovers from the network promos. And when the block hit its peak, when 3 or 4 of our favorite shows landed back to back, we'd high-five like we had just won something. Because, in a way, we had. We had won a morning that felt like a lifetime of joy packed into a few hours. Those cartoon blocks felt endless not because they were long, but because they mattered so deeply. They weren't distractions, they were immersions. You weren't just watching, you were becoming. You were learning to imagine, to dream, to question, to care. You were absorbing the idea that worlds could be better, brighter, more bizarre, and more just than the one you lived in. Even now, as an adult navigating the complexity of real life, there are days when I long for that feeling again. Not just the nostalgia, but the sense of open wonder. That belief that anything could happen next. That a door could open into a world of magic or mystery or meaning. That a talking dog and a time-traveling boy could make you laugh and think all in the same breath. The cartoon blocks ended eventually, of course. They always did. The final credits rolled, the network shifted to something else, and the day began creeping in around you. But for that brief stretch of time, those shows gave you something bigger than entertainment. They gave you possibility. They gave you escape. And more than anything, they gave you hope. Hope that maybe the world outside the living room could be just as exciting. That maybe you could be the hero or the sidekick or the voice of reason in someone else's story. That maybe adventure didn't end when the screen went dark. It just began again in your imagination. Every cartoon block had its shining stars. Those shows that made you sit up straighter, lean forward, and forget everything else happening around you. They were the reason you woke up early on a Saturday, the crown jewels of the lineup, the programs that made your heart race the moment their opening songs began. You waited for them like someone waits for their birthday, and when they finally aired, you gave them your full attention. Total silence, no bathroom breaks, no cereal refills, just you and the screen, connected by a glowing lifeline of imagination. But for every beloved favorite, there was also that one show, the in-between, the placeholder, the 22 minutes of semi-interesting animation that served as the bridge between the good stuff. You didn't hate it, but you didn't love it either. You watched it with one eye, maybe while flipping through a magazine or playing with toys on the floor. It was background noise, a waiting room, a necessary sacrifice to reach the next peak in your cartoon adventure. For me, the favorites were sacred. Batman the Animated Series was near the top of the list. Everything about it felt different. The music, the shadows, the slow pacing. It wasn't loud or chaotic like most cartoons. It was moody, artistic, and almost cinematic. Even as a kid, I could sense that it was doing something other shows weren't. It treated you like you were smart, like you could handle themes of loss and justice and fear. Every episode felt like a tiny noir film wrapped in comic book magic. Then there was Animaniacs, which felt like controlled chaos. The Warner siblings lived in their water tower, but they might as well have lived in my head. Their humor was fast and clever, filled with references I didn't always understand, but somehow still found funny. I loved the way they sang their jokes, their voices climbing scales and rhythms that stayed in my ears for days. When that theme song began, I knew I was about to laugh out loud, even if I didn't quite get the punchline. It was my weekly lesson in joy. And of course, Pokémon. That show was more than entertainment. It was a phenomenon. Watching Ash travel through cities and forests, catching creatures with strange names and wild powers, felt like a quest I was part of. I knew every line of the theme song. I reenacted battles with plastic figures. I debated with friends at school about the best team combinations. Pokémon wasn't just a show, it was a lifestyle. And every episode was a step further into a world I wished I could live in. But then there were the others, the shows I tolerated, the ones that filled the space between my favorites. I won't name them all, because some have since grown cult followings and nostalgic love. But at the time, they felt off. Maybe it was the animation style, or the way the characters talked, or that nothing really happened. I would glance at the clock, count the minutes, and tell myself just a little longer. Then the good one starts. They were the commercials of the cartoon world, only longer and slightly more colorful.
Still, I watched them, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with a sense of duty. After all, turning off the TV wasn't an option. What if I forgot to turn it back on in time? What if I missed the start of the next show and lost the thread of an ongoing storyline? In the era before streaming, before pause buttons and rewind functions, you either caught it live or waited a full week for another chance. So you waited, patiently, watching the show you didn't love, knowing the one you did was just around the corner. Looking back, those filler shows taught a strange kind of loyalty. They reminded me that sometimes the thing you want most comes after a little bit of patience. They also made me appreciate the good ones more. If every show had been amazing, I might have grown numb to the magic. But because I had to endure the mediocre, the great ones felt even greater. Their color was brighter, their jokes hit harder, their worlds pulled me in deeper. There was a kind of rhythm to it. I'd grab a snack when the mess show started, refill my bowl, stretch my legs, maybe build something with Legos or draw a new comic on a loose sheet of printer paper. But my ear was always half tuned to the TV, listening for the final music cue, that telltale fade out that signaled the good stuff was coming. It was a ritual of readiness, like a drum roll before a performance. Sometimes those in-between shows surprised me. There were episodes that broke the mold, a clever joke, a touching moment, a strangely deep message hidden behind a goofy character design. And just like that, a show I only half liked would earn a little more of my attention. Maybe next time I'd watch with both eyes. Maybe it would move up a few notches in the invisible ranking system I had built in my head. Friends at school would compare notes, trading opinions about which shows were worth watching and which ones were just filler. Debates broke out, fierce loyalties formed. One kid's favorite was another's least favorite, and we defended our picks like sports fans cheering for rival teams. We couldn't stream or binge or fast forward, so we learned to schedule our weekends around what we loved. And we learned, perhaps without realizing it, how to make peace with the in-between. There's a quiet beauty in that, I think. The idea that not everything in life has to be thrilling to be valuable. Some moments are just bridges. Some experiences are the connective tissue that lead you to something better.
And if you can endure them with a bit of grace, they become part of the story too. Even now, there are things I watch or do that I don't love, but I do them because they're part of a bigger picture. Like the errands I run before a fun weekend trip, the emails I answer before diving into a creative project, the chores I finish before losing myself in a good book. They're not glamorous, but they make the good stuff feel earned. And honestly, I sometimes miss even those lesser shows. Not because they were great, but because they were part of a time when everything felt connected. When one half hour led to another and every slot on the schedule had its place. Back then, even the boring shows had a kind of charm. They were part of a ritual, part of a childhood stitched together with laughter, waiting, and anticipation. So yes, there were favorites. The shows that lit up my world, made me laugh until my stomach hurt, or moved me to tears with a surprisingly tender episode. And yes, there were those I barely watched, shows that played in the background while I counted down the seconds. But they all belonged to the same era, the same sacred hours of morning, where cartoons weren't just shows, they were life. And life, as it turns out, is made up of both the unforgettable and the forgettable, the highlights and the filler, the shows you worship and the ones you just endure. But in the end, they all help build the memory. There was something about watching cartoons that didn't end when the TV was turned off. The story stayed with you, echoing in your head like the lingering taste of sweet cereal milk. The colors clung to your mind, the music hummed under your breath, and the characters followed you around the house like invisible friends. You didn't just watch cartoons, you absorbed them, memorized their lines, mimicked their poses, and at some point, almost inevitably, tried to recreate them with your own hands. It usually happened in the quiet lull of the afternoon, when the living room buzz had faded, and the sun poured through the curtains in long strips of gold. Armed with nothing more than a dull pencil and a stack of printer paper, or lined notebook pages if the good stuff was gone, I would sit cross-legged on the floor, determined to become an animator in my own right. I wasn't interested in drawing trees or still-life bowls of fruit. I wanted to draw Sonic the Hedgehog, Doug Funny, and the Powerpuff Girls. The memory of their shapes was fresh in my mind. Sonic's spiky silhouette, Doug's bean-shaped head, Bubbles' enormous eyes. They had all just danced across my screen that morning, and now it was my turn to bring them back to life. I would start with light pencil strokes, whispering their names as if the sound might guide my hand. Sometimes I used the VHS cover as reference, squinting at the tiny illustrations and trying to replicate each curve, each angle. Other times I relied entirely on memory, which often led to wild results. It was frustrating and magical all at once. The characters I loved so much didn't always cooperate on paper. Sonic's quills never looked right. Doug's nose was too long or too short. Blossom's bow ended up lopsided or drooping like wilted lettuce. But I kept trying, over and over. Erase, redraw, erase again, until finally something clicked. A line curved just right, a face came together, and for a brief second, it almost felt like animation had poured out of the screen and into my fingertips. These weren't just drawings, they were declarations, proof that the morning's adventure had changed me, even a little. And when the paper started to fill, when I saw a crowd of crooked cartoon faces smiling back at me, I felt something close to pride. Not perfection, not even real artistic success, just the warm joy of connection. I had made something, I had tried, and in trying, I had kept the story going. Sometimes I invited friends over and we drew together, turning my bedroom into a makeshift studio. We'd flip through old comic books, argue over who could draw better versions of our favorite heroes, and compete to see who could sketch the cleanest version of Pikachu. We weren't chasing fame. We weren't thinking about art school or careers. We were simply keeping the magic alive, translating what we had seen into our own language of pencil and paper. We giggled when the drawings came out weird. We clapped when someone got a character just right. We were fans and we were creators, all at once. I still remember the texture of that paper, how the pencil tip would dig in too deep if I pressed too hard, how the eraser would leave faint smudges, like ghosts of failed sketches past. I remember trying to color them in with markers or crayons, always careful to stay inside the learns, but almost always bleeding beyond them. And I remember, more than anything, The sense that drawing those characters meant they were mine in some way. Not just images I saw on television, but friends I could recreate, reshape, and revisit whenever I wanted. There were days I would tape them to the wall, an entire cast of hand-drawn personalities watching over my room like a mismatched mural. Each one told a story, not just of the character themselves, but of who I was when I drew them. The way my hands shook, the way I rushed the feet, the way I sometimes gave them capes or sunglasses or swapped their outfits just to see what they looked like. These sketches were fingerprints of my imagination, messy, inconsistent, full of wonder. My parents would glance at the growing pile of papers and smile with that expression that said, "Another future artist, maybe." They probably saw it as a phase, like any other childhood obsession. But to me, it felt serious, sacred even, like I was capturing moments that might otherwise float away. A way to hold on to the feeling of a perfect cartoon morning even as the hours pulled me further into the day. Sometimes I tried to create my own characters too. They were usually strange hybrids of shows I loved, part superhero, part talking animal, maybe with laser eyes or wings. I gave them names like Ultra Fox or Mega Kid or the Flame Avenger. I drew comics with them in dramatic poses, fighting impossible villains or flying through outer space. And even when I knew the proportions were wrong or the plots made no sense, I kept going. Because in that space between watching and drawing, I had found something better than entertainment. I had found a way to become part of the world I adored. These moments taught me things I couldn't yet articulate. That creativity doesn't need to be perfect to be powerful. That copying can be a step toward creating. That love for a story can take root in your own hands and grow into something new. It was an early lesson in joy, persistence, and imagination. And though I never became a professional artist, those afternoons sketching cartoons taught me how to see the world not just as it is, but as it could be. Even now, when I stumble upon an old character or rewatch an episode from that time, I remember those papers scattered across my bedroom floor, the frustration, the triumph, the way I tried and tried again. And in that memory, I find a quiet kind of peace. Because long before I knew what creativity meant, I had already discovered it. In a pencil, a blank page, and the desire to make Sonic's feet look just a little less weird.
The cartoons were always the center of attention, but they never played in silence. They lived in a symphony of background noise that was uniquely and unmistakably owned. The soundtrack of a Saturday morning wasn't just theme songs and punchlines. It was layered with the gentle chaos of life waking up around me. Long before I understood the comfort of routine, I was surrounded by it in the form of familiar domestic sounds that wrapped around the screen like a warm blanket. The day began with the click and hum of the washing machine coming to life. It always started before I even realized I was awake, the steady thump and spin echoing from the laundry room down the hall. There was something oddly soothing about it. That rhythmic churn, like a heartbeat pulsing beneath the floorboards, meant Mom was up and the day had begun. Sometimes I could even hear the snap of wet clothes being tossed into the drum, followed by the unmistakable creak of the detergent bottle being squeezed. It was a background lullaby I didn't appreciate until much later in life. Then came the smell of coffee. Before I even turned on the television, that warm, earthy aroma would drift through the hallway, creeping under the bedroom door like a soft morning fog. The gurgle of the coffee maker was a ritual in itself, a slow, bubbling sigh that told me everything was okay, that our old machine still worked, that the day was still unfolding just as it should. And when the scent met the faint whiff of toast or frying butter, I knew my mom was in the kitchen, probably in her robe, her hair still pinned, humming along to some quiet song from the radio. The real soundtrack, though, was her voice. I could predict it almost to the second. Just as the opening credits of my favorite show rolled in, her voice would echo from the kitchen like a reminder from the sky. "Did you brush your teeth yet?" It wasn't a question so much as a morning ritual in itself, spoken the same way every Saturday, like part of the script. Sometimes she added a second line, "Are you just gonna sit there in your pajamas all day?" And I would grin, knowing the answer was yes, at least until lunch.
I never responded out loud. I always waited, pretending I hadn't heard her, hoping she'd forget. She never did. There were other sounds too. The flick and click of light switches, the whoosh of the bathroom door opening and closing, the sudden clink of dishes being stacked, or the low buzz of the vacuum getting too close to the living room. They were never loud enough to drown out the cartoons, but they were always there, woven into the experience like invisible characters in the episode. A dog barking 2 houses down, the neighbor's lawnmower coughing to life, the metallic clatter of the mailbox being opened as the postman came and went. My little brother sometimes added to the mix. He'd shuffle out in his oversized t-shirt, rubbing his eyes, and plop next to me without a word. He never asked what show I was watching. He just sat there, leaning his head against my shoulder, occasionally stealing my cereal when he thought I wasn't looking. We never really talked during the shows. Talking was reserved for commercials or arguments over what channel to switch to next. But his breathing, his presence, his sleepy sighs, they were part of the soundscape too, like a harmony line to the melody of Saturday. Every now and then, there'd be a phone call. The old landline, with its curly cord and clunky buttons, would ring once, twice, and then be scooped up by Mom in mid-laugh. Her voice shifted instantly into polite mode, soft and upbeat, as she spoke to a friend or my aunt or maybe grandma. I never paid much attention to the words, only to the tone, light, reassuring, full of the energy of a woman who had already been awake for hours while we were still wrapped in dreams. Sometimes she'd drift past the living room during the call, giving me a look that said, "Pause it and brush your teeth." I never paused it, but I always eventually brushed. There was comfort in this soundtrack, in knowing that even if nothing extraordinary happened that day, the familiar rhythms would remain. The cartoons might be wild and unpredictable, full of battles and jokes and fantastical places, but the real magic was in what surrounded them. The hum of the world outside the screen, the things I didn't realize I loved until years later, when I found myself in a silent apartment on a Saturday morning, pouring coffee without a gurgle, sitting in front of streaming menus without any background noise, and suddenly longing for the clatter of dishes and that one question shouted from the kitchen like a gentle spell. Even the way the sunlight hit the floor was part of the memory, how it filtered through the window blinds, casting warm stripes across the old rug, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. That light, combined with the gentle thrum of morning chores and cartoon laughter, made the living room feel like the safest place in the universe. Time slowed there. It didn't matter what day of the month it was, or if there was homework due, or if something hard had happened the day before. That space, with all its overlapping noises, was a tiny, unshakable sanctuary. I've tried to recreate it since. Sometimes I leave the washing machine running on purpose, or I brew a pot of coffee I won't drink just to smell it. I even turn on old cartoon episodes in the background while I clean the house, hoping to spark some of that old feeling. But the truth is, it was never about any one thing. It was the combination, the magic recipe of animation, sound, routine, and love, all wrapped in the gentle messiness of home. And every time I think of those mornings, I don't just remember the shows. I remember the atmosphere, the real-life ambiance that surrounded the fiction, the machine spinning, the voice calling, the spoon clinking, the unspoken promise that everything, just for a few hours, was exactly where it should be. It always happened slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a dream dissolving in the morning light. One by one, the cartoons would start to change. The bright animation would give way to static images. The theme songs would become less bouncy. The laughter in the living room would fade into yawns. And before I realized it, the final show would roll its credits, and the screen would shift into something colder, something less magical. That was the moment when real life started to seep back in, like water creeping through a crack in the door. The cartoons didn't end with the grand finale. They just stopped. One minute I was in the middle of an alien planet or a candy-colored kingdom, and the next I was staring at a game show I didn't care about, or a man in a suit talking about finance or politics. The voices were deeper, the pacing slower, even the colors looked less vivid. My younger self didn't know what the word melancholy meant, but I felt it in my chest like a quiet disappointment every Saturday around the same time. It was like the air in the room shifted. The TV, once a portal to wonder, became a mirror reflecting back reality. I used to sit there for a minute longer, hoping maybe it was just a long commercial break, that another cartoon would start if I just waited. But the hosts kept talking, their voices overlapping with words that didn't rhyme and didn't sparkle. Eventually, I'd accept the truth. The magic hours were over. It was like the end of a carnival, the lights flickering off, the music winding down, the clowns packing up their tricks. The silence after the last joke felt heavier than anything. Sometimes I tried flipping through the channels, hoping to catch something, anything animated. But they were all the same. The other stations had changed too. News updates, documentaries, cooking shows, and old reruns of things adults watched. It felt like the whole world had decided, all at once, that the time for fun was done. Even the sunlight outside looked different, as if it had moved from golden to plain. The shadows in the room had stretched just enough to remind me that morning was ending and something else was beginning. That was usually the signal. Time to get up, time to move. My mom would come in with a basket of laundry or a reminder that we needed to clean our rooms. The floor that had felt like part of the cartoon universe now felt like regular old carpet again. I'd look down at my pajamas, still sitting crisscross on the rug, and realized my cereal bowl had long been empty. There were no more theme songs to drown out the ticking of the clock or the rumble of responsibilities approaching. But there was a strange comfort in the shift too, a gentle nudge back into the real world. Sometimes I take a deep breath, stretch my arms toward the ceiling, and feel that peculiar stillness that settles over a house after the noise fades. The kind of quiet that feels heavier than silence. And then I'd hear the sounds of the outside world, the neighbor's dog barking, the distant rumble of a car starting, the wind brushing against the windows, and I'd know it was time to do something else. I usually went outside next. The yard, the street, the world beyond the television screen became my new adventure zone. My friends would be emerging from their homes too, each of us blinking into the daylight like little explorers, still buzzing from the morning's excitement. We didn't talk much about the shows. It wasn't necessary. They lived in us, carried in our energy, in our games, and the way we mimicked sound effects or tried to run like our favorite heroes.
We'd grab sticks and turn them into swords. The sidewalk became lava. Trees were spaceships. The front porch was the base of operations. Everything we had seen on the screen became real again, only this time we were the characters. We made up rules, broke them, and laughed until our sides hurt. The stories didn't stop when the TV turned off. They just moved outdoors, fueled by our imaginations, running wild until lunch was called or knees got scraped. But not every Saturday was like that. Some days the end of cartoons brought a kind of quiet ache. Maybe my friends weren't around. Maybe it was raining and the backyard was a soggy mess. On those days, I'd wander through the house aimlessly, trying to fill the void left by the cartoons. I'd peek into my room, pick up toys that no longer felt as exciting, or stare out the window, watching the clouds move. That ache wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like longing, a kind of homesickness for a place that didn't exist outside the television. Eventually, I'd find something to do, a coloring book, a half-finished drawing. I might even sneak back to the TV and flip to a VHS tape, trying to recreate the feeling with an old recording of a favorite episode. But it never quite worked the same. The timing had passed, the moment was gone. The enchantment of Saturday morning cartoons only lived in those sacred hours, surrounded by cereal crunches and coffee smells, by washing machines and quiet questions shouted from the kitchen. Looking back now, I realize those transitions taught me something. They taught me that magic has a rhythm, that every burst of wonder comes with a gentle landing, that joy isn't meant to last all day, because if it did, we'd forget how to recognize it. The ending of the cartoons was just as important as their beginning. It made the whole thing feel rare, special, something to look forward to again 7 days later, when everything would reset and the spell would begin anew. And in that strange, beautiful rhythm, I grew up. Not all at once, but gradually, one Saturday morning at a time. From bright-eyed viewer to dreamy backyard adventurer, from cereal-stained pajamas to quiet introspection. The cartoons would end, the real world would return, and life would go on. But part of me still waited for next week, for the next escape, the next journey through color and sound, through laughter and light. The magic always faded, yes, but it never disappeared. It simply stepped aside, waiting patiently for its turn to shine again. By the time Monday morning came around, the magic of Saturday's cartoons had already been folded into memory, but it wasn't tucked away quietly. It lingered just below the surface, ready to burst back into life the moment the first bell rang and we spilled into the playground, our backpacks swinging and our voices already rising with anticipation. Those early minutes before class were sacred, not for warming up our brains with multiplication or reviewing spelling lists, but for something far more important, reliving every detail of what we had watched just 2 days earlier. Talking about cartoons at school on Monday wasn't just tradition, it was ritual. A collective ceremony where we pieced together plots, laughed about our favorite moments, reenacted fight scenes, and shared wild theories about what might happen next week. Everyone had seen the same thing, but somehow each of us experienced it differently. There were arguments over which part was the best. There were passionate debates about who would win in a battle between characters from different universes. There was even a kind of hierarchy. The ones who remembered the most were the unofficial leaders of the discussion. Recess was the main arena for these exchanges. As soon as we got outside, the chatter began like the humming of an engine starting up. Someone would shout, "Did you see what happened to the robot when it transformed?" And a dozen heads would whip around with equal parts excitement and urgency. The episode was more than just something we watched. It became a story we all shared, an anchor that connected us, even if we barely talked during class. Cartoons weren't just entertainment, they were social glue. There was a kind of unspoken pressure though. You had to watch it. If you missed the new episode, you missed more than just the show. You missed the conversation. You missed the jokes, the references, the reenactments. You became a quiet spectator to a story that had already moved on without you. I remember those rare Mondays when I had overslept or been dragged to the supermarket during prime cartoon time. I would stand on the edge of the group, nodding and pretending to laugh even when I didn't quite know what had happened. That feeling of being left out, of not knowing the plot twist everyone was talking about, was worse than any missed homework assignment. But when you did watch it, when you remembered everything, when you could repeat the villain's line or describe the secret base in detail, then you were unstoppable. You were part of something larger than yourself. I would retell entire scenes like a performer on a stage, gesturing wildly, doing my best impersonation of the characters' voices, and watching as my classmates leaned in, eyes wide. Even the quieter kids would join in, offering their own interpretations or reminding us of small things we had missed. Together, we stitched the episode back together with our words, giving it new life. Sometimes we even invented our own continuations. What if the monster came back next week with a new power? What if the sidekick turned evil? These moments felt like collaborative storytelling, a bunch of 8-year-olds imagining plot twists better than anything on TV. Our recess fantasies would spill into lunch and linger into the last bell. When the teacher wasn't looking, we passed drawings of new characters, secret weapons, or next week predictions on folded up notebook paper. We were creators now, not just consumers. And every group had that one kid, the one who swore they had seen next week's episode already. They would lean in, lower their voice dramatically, and say something like, "My cousin in another city has a different cable package. They aired it early." Whether or not it was true didn't matter. For a few moments, that kid became the keeper of forbidden knowledge, and the rest of us clung to every whispered word. We wanted to believe. We wanted the world of the cartoons to extend beyond the screen, beyond time slots and channels. We wanted it to be alive. Our teachers never quite understood.
To them, our Monday excitement was just noise, just children bouncing off the walls. But for us, it was more than excitement. It was continuity. The cartoon had ended Saturday morning, but the story lived on in us, in our conversations, in the way we sprinted to the swings reenacting chase scenes, or drew chalk circles on the pavement that represented portals. Even math class couldn't fully pull us back. Sometimes we'd sneak in cartoon references when answering questions, grinning across the room at the only other kid who caught it. These discussions weren't just about the plot, they were about identity. You discovered who shared your favorites, who rooted for the same heroes, who thought the villain wasn't really that bad. You learned who watched the same channel, who had to rely on VHS tapes, who had cable and who didn't. Cartoons created unexpected friendships and quiet rivalries. There was an entire ecosystem built around those shared moments, one that only made sense to kids who had lived it. I remember one Monday more clearly than the others. The episode had been a game changer. A main character had vanished into a mysterious dimension, and no one knew if they were coming back. The playground buzzed like a live wire. We all had theories. Some thought it was a permanent goodbye. Others believed it was a test. I remember defending my theory with the intensity of a scholar, standing on top of the bench near the monkey bars, arms waving as I explained the hidden clues I had noticed. In that moment, I felt like a hero too, not with powers, but with purpose. Eventually, of course, the day would wind down. The bell would ring and we'd shuffle back to class, still whispering our last bits of analysis. But the stories never really ended. They just followed us home, into our sketchbooks, into our dreams, waiting to be rekindled again the next Saturday. And come Monday, the cycle would repeat. A new episode, a new ritual, a new chance to relive the magic all over again with the people who made it matter most. Those Monday rituals are gone now, faded into the fabric of childhood. But even today, when I hear someone mention an old cartoon character or hum a forgotten theme song, that familiar flicker returns. I smile, remembering the thrill of that sacred playground discussion, the electricity of shared wonder, and the silent oath we all took to never forget how it felt to care so much about something that existed in pixels and imagination. Because the truth is, the cartoons weren't just cartoons. They were anchors in time. And the Mondays that followed were proof that what we loved could echo far beyond the screen. It was never really about the episode alone. It was about the way we carried it with us and the way it brought us together.
Time has a strange way of turning the smallest things into the most meaningful. Back then, I didn't know I was living through something sacred. I didn't realize that the simple act of waking up on a Saturday morning, still wrapped in sleep, stumbling toward the TV with messy hair and sleepy eyes, was quietly becoming a memory I'd carry for the rest of my life. There was no announcement, no final episode to mark the end of an era. One day, the cartoons just didn't hit the same. One day, life got louder, more responsibilities, more screens, more noise. But those mornings, those Saturday mornings, were untouched by the world's weight. There were no alarms, no schedules, just sunlight creeping through the curtains, the smell of breakfast drifting from the kitchen, and the soft hum of the TV warming up. It was a time that belonged completely to you. No expectations, no deadlines, no need to impress anyone. You didn't even have to speak. You could just be, curled up on the couch or lying on the carpet, face close to the screen, feet kicking behind you, heart open to the stories that danced across the channels. Those quiet hours before the world woke up were like a secret, yours alone, and yet somehow shared by a whole generation. Looking back, it's clear now that it wasn't just about cartoons. It was about what they represented: freedom, imagination, and comfort. The innocence of not knowing what stress felt like. The joy of being completely present. It was the purest kind of happiness, the kind that doesn't need to be explained or chased or measured. It just was. A joy made of color and laughter and characters who always found a way to win in the end.
A joy born from knowing exactly what you love and having nothing in your way to stop you from loving it fully. And maybe that's the beauty of it. Those mornings didn't try to be profound. They didn't teach us how to be adults or warn us about the future. They just gave us a moment, a space to breathe, a space to dream, a space where everything felt possible and nothing felt urgent. They gave us permission to be soft, to be silly, to believe in magic, even if it was just for half an hour at a time. And somehow, that became enough to shape the way we see the world even now. Sometimes, when I need a break from reality, I find myself searching for those old theme songs or clips online. The quality is grainy, the resolution low, the jokes simpler than I remember. But the feeling never left. It still stirs something deep in me. A warmth, a calm, a quiet smile that reminds me of who I was before the world asked me to be anything else. That child, with the cereal bowl in one hand and the remote in the other, still lives inside me. Still believes that Saturday morning was the best time of the week.
And maybe that's what joy really is. Not something loud or flashy, but something soft and consistent. Something you didn't have to earn. Something that just was. A kind of happiness that met you exactly where you were, pajamas and all, and said, "This is enough. You're enough." We didn't need much to feel full back then. Just our shows, our imagination, and a little space carved out in time where nothing else mattered. So now, as I look back, I understand. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was love. A love for the simplicity, the predictability, the small rituals that made up a big part of who we became. We weren't chasing followers or grades or approval. We were just living, fully, quietly, joyfully, and we didn't even know it. Those Saturday mornings may be gone, but they echo still, in the way I pause at cartoons while flipping channels, in the way I smile at a child watching their favorite show with that same hypnotized look, in the way I close my eyes sometimes and can still hear the soft hum of the TV, the faint sound of my mother in the kitchen, and the familiar voices of the characters who taught me to laugh, to hope, and to keep watching. Those Saturday mornings may be gone, but they echo still, in the way I pause at cartoons while flipping channels, in the way I smile at a child watching their favorite show with that same hypnotized look, in the way I close my eyes sometimes and can still hear the soft hum of the TV, the faint sound of my mother in the kitchen, and the familiar voices of the characters who taught me to laugh, to hope, and to keep watching. They say happiness is fleeting, but I think it leaves traces. And in those old cartoon blocks, those early mornings, those schoolyard retellings, I found the kind of happiness that never really left. It just grew quiet, waiting patiently like the next episode.